can really remember vividly. So it would have been, I was 17, and it would have been the summer of 1980. I was at a bit of a loose end. I'd just finished high school, and I was waiting I did a year of work before I went to university, college, and I just one afternoon, I just remember being kind of bored and at a loose end, thinking, well, I'll put something on that I've never really listened to. And so I found this tape of Born to Run I'd never played, and put it on and just sat there. I can remember it so vividly, the sun coming into the windows, the sofa I was sitting on, because I put on obviously Thunder Road, and the piano comes in, and you got these great lines like, a vision she dances across the porch. And I thought, that's a nice line. I like that. This is interesting. And don't turn me home again. I just can't face myself alone again. I'm thinking, this is great. And that just got drawn into this song by these fantastic lyrics. And I remember that was the first time I'd ever heard Thunder Road. Like, wow, that was great. And then straight into 10th Avenue. By the time I listened to the whole album, just sat down and listened really carefully to the whole album, and it was like a religious conversion. Honestly, it was like it hit me with a kind of force I've never felt before about any kind of piece of music or album.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and we are in another timey-wimey episode. We are my morning, my guest afternoon, from the UK, looking very comfortable, is my new friend, Jeff Smith. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jesse. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, so tell us a little about yourself.
So I am a member of Parliament in the UK. So I guess the closest equivalent would be maybe a congressman in the US. So
right,
like you have the two houses in your legislature. You have the House of Representatives and the Senate. Mm-hmm. We have the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and I'm a member of the House of Commons. I represent a seat called Manchester Withington. So Manchester is in the north of England, and my patch is the sort of south side of Manchester. And before that, I mean, I've been in politics a long time. I'm a Labour MP in the UK, and I've been in kind of Labour politics for a long time. Before that, I was actually, unusually for a member of Parliament, I was a DJ. That's my background.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, the great thing about Parliament in the UK, and I guess it's the same in the US, is we have all kinds of people with different backgrounds there. So you can be, lots of kind of political advisors and lawyers and those kinds of things, but also, miners, I don't know, care workers, all kinds of different people. And I think I'm the only former professional DJ. So I made a living doing that for about 20 years. So I was a kind of respectable citizen in the day. I was on the local council in Manchester. And then by night, I was in nightclubs playing music.
Wow. What made you want to go to seek something, national wide, a country, more of a, instead of local politics, more of a national?
Well, it was never my plan, to be honest. I never intended, never set out and thinking one day I'm going to be an MP. I just got involved in local politics. I got involved in the local council, and it became more and more involved. And I was kind of in charge of the budget for the city and that kind of responsibility. And then back in 2013, just happened to become a vacancy for the Labour candidate for this area. So I thought, if I don't put my name forward, I'll probably regret it forever, because it's my home area where I grew up. So I thought I'll give it a chance, and I was selected by the Labour Party to be the candidate. And in 2015, we had in this area we had a good result, and we won the seat back actually from another party. And so I've been a member of Parliament since 2015.
Does young Jeff, are you shocking young Jeff to think that, because it sounds like music was your gig, and all of a sudden would young Jeff go, what? How did this happen?
I think so. I think young Jeff was absolutely convinced that he wanted to be a rock star.
Didn't we all? Didn't we all? Yes.
And there was going to be no doubt about it at all. But somehow, I don't quite know how that didn't work out.
Wow.
It didn't work out.
So let's start at the beginning. Talk to me. You mentioned you grew up in that area. What kind of music did your family listen to? Was it a musical household growing up?
Yeah, my family loved music. My parents, I guess, were the sort of last generation before rock and roll, so they weren't really into rock music. My dad was into modern jazz. My mum liked all sorts. She liked the crooners, but she liked classical music as well. But we used to listen to a lot of kind of jazz, so Sinatra, Nat King Cole, those kinds of people. That was what my parents liked to listen to. But also kind of omnipresent in my youth were the Beatles. So I grew up, and one of the things they tell about me is I used to dance around when I was a toddler. I used to dance around the early Beatles records, and they're kind of. I mean, I still think the Beatles are the greatest artists of the 20th century, and I think they were another one of those sort of artists who are kind of go through your whole life with. I think, and so I was quite into that kind of stuff when I was very young. I was into the Beatles and that kind of 60s sound, and then I don't know if you had this phenomenon in the US, but when I was first getting into music properly, we had glam rock. So into kind of Slade and the Sweet and some of those kind of slightly rocky but very poppy bands, and that was a big thing when I was kind of, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, 10, 11 maybe, and so I used to love all those kind of great classic pop singles from the early kind of 70s. And then I also used to love 10cc. I don't know if you know much about 10cc. They were they're actually from Manchester as well, actually.
Things We Do for Love, right?
Say again?
Things We Did for Love, yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I really liked them when I was a sort of young teenager, and then punk came along, and I was kind of into some of the punk bands as well, and new wave bands. So that's kind of, so I suppose when punk came along, there was always a kind of, it was like almost like a ground zero, and you either like punk or you like the old stuff. But I was kind of always straddling the two things. So I was like the kind of classic rock as well as the new stuff that came along, the kind of revolutionary new punk bands.
Yeah. I grew up, I was born in 59, so my high school years were the middle 70s, right? I graduated high school in 1977. So I certainly remember 10cc on, I'm a child of top 40 radio.
Yeah.
Right? My parents were I grew up most of my time in Louisiana, so the southern. And so I grew up with my mom and my dad both loving country music. My mom a little more into 50s, like Fats Domino, Bobby Darin, that kind of also. But so I did not, being a top 40 kid, did not get a lot of the things that weren't on AM radio. Right. Yeah. FM radio were for the people. Oh, they were too cool. They were too cool for me. Right. I had to stick with, the pop stuff.
So in the UK, there were basically, you had only FM radio playing music really in those days. So and that was mostly to kind of top 40 stuff. And you had only a couple of TV shows that played music. So there was the weekly institution in the UK was called Top of the Pops.
Right.
On a Thursday night, they used to play the charts.
I've heard that discussed before. Yes.
Yeah. So that was the one thing that was the must see TV show of the week. It was Thursday night to watch Top of the Pops, and we also had. It was too late for me when I was a young kid, but we had a show called the Old Grey Whistle Test, and they used to play the more kind of more classic rock, I guess, and the non-chart stuff. But that was on past my bedtime when I was at school, so I didn't get into that kind of stuff. But so I kind of grew up on the pop stuff as well, I guess.
Yeah, one of the things that I remember is during high school, there was in the US a midnight special TV series that came on like on Friday nights. And it was a 90-minute show that was rotating guests, and would have a lot of different music. And Wolfman Jack was one of the guys that would talk about this. So I got a lot of exposure to music from that.
So you used to have to take what you could get in those days, couldn't you? Because obviously there was no internet, so you'd just grasp onto whatever bits of music you could find and listen to it voraciously.
Yeah, it is kind of. I joke about this a lot, right? But one of my early non-musical obsessions was the TV show Star Trek, right? I was a huge science fiction fan. I'm wearing a Doctor Who shirt this morning, and and the idea was like you could imagine it, like when I was 11 or 12, I wanted to get rich enough that I could own a movie projector and then have the films of all the different Star Trek episodes, the original episodes,
Great.
There's no way that you would have thought that in the future, almost any TV show or any musical artist, album, song, you just go to this magic box, type a few words, and then there it is. Often free. Though I did figure out my different subscriptions, and it is certainly not free, all the different streaming services I have, but it's a magical. When did you first discover Bruce? And if you can, Jeff, articulate what about him spoke to you.
Okay, so I can remember it very, very vividly, actually. So when I was getting my kind of musical education, looking around for all these things that you could try and find, it came from, I guess, two sources. One was the kind of weekly music press and music papers that we used to buy and again, read voraciously. And I used to read about this guy, Bruce Springsteen. He was this cool American guy who did these great shows. Never heard him because he wouldn't be on the radio in the UK or on the TV. And then the other part of my musical education came from, we used to go to, I don't know if you have these or had these in the US as well, but in our local library, we had a record library section.
Yes, absolutely.
So you'd go along and borrow an LP and you'd borrow it for a week, and I'd go home and tape it, put it on cassette. And, that was kind of a musical education. I'd go and get all kind of Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and Rolling Stones and all those kind of classic records and tape them and build up this kind of collection of great music. And while I was doing that, I recorded Darkness because I'd read about this guy, Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
And I also, at some point, got a tape of Born. I must have taken Born to Run home, borrowed it, taken it home and taped it, and never really listened to it. And I listened to Darkness a couple of times and thought, yeah, I like that. I remember quite liking Badlands and quite liking Racing in the Street, but it didn't really hit me,
Right.
And then I can really remember vividly, so it would have been, I was 17, and it would have been the summer of 1980. And I was at a bit of a loose end. I'd just finished high school, and I was waiting I did a year of work before I went to university, college. And I just one afternoon, I just remember being kind of bored and at a loose end, thinking, well, I'll put something on that I've never really listened to. And so I found this tape of Born to Run I'd never played, and put it on and just sat there. I can remember it so vividly, the sun coming into the windows, the sofa I was sitting on, because I put on obviously Thunder Road, and the piano comes in, and you got these great lines like a vision she dances across the porch. And I thought, that's a nice line. I like that. This is interesting. And don't turn me home again. I just can't face myself alone again. I'm thinking this is great, and that just got drawn into this song by these fantastic lyrics. And I remember that was the first time I'd ever heard Thunder Road. Like, wow, that was great. And then straight into 10th Avenue. And by the time I listened to the whole album, just sat down and listened really carefully to the whole album, and it was like a religious conversion. Honestly, it was like it hit me with a kind of force I've never felt before about any kind of piece of music or album. And I just thought, this is what I've been looking for, kind of thing. And I just remember just listening to that whole album. By the end of Jungleland, thinking this is incredible. I've never heard anything like this. And it was just I can remember that afternoon in the summer of 1980 so vividly, and that was kind of that was the start of it, really. And so I went back and listened to Darkness and thought, actually, yeah, this is great. And then went out and bought The Wild and the Innocent a few days later. And so then that summer I kind of listened to those 4 albums on repeat, the first 4 albums. And it was quite a good time, quite an exciting time to discover Bruce, because then I think it was the October, The River came out.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of buzz around Bruce, and then he came over. He was due to come to the UK for the first tour, for the River tour, the following spring. And so the other thing we used to, so I was reading everything I could find about Bruce Springsteen. Bought the Dave Marsh first biography, and listening to the 4 albums, listening to any bootlegs I could find, and always reading about these legendary shows that he did. And getting more and more excited. One day I'm going to see this guy, and it's going to be amazing. And so it kind of, that was, and of course in those days we had fanzines as well. And so in the UK we had a fanzine called Point Blank, and I think Backstreet started as a fanzine around that time. And so I'd read those cover to cover, and then read them again cover to cover. So it's kind of an exciting time to discover Bruce, really, I guess.
That's wonderful. It is, you think about, right? Like I can remember, I know the excitement of when you find a new artist, or for that matter, a renew writer. And so you're devouring all their old books.
Yeah.
And then when you find, there's a new one coming on,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
By the way, Dan French is the editor, he did Point Blank, and he's been on the show multiple times.
Okay.
Great storyteller. Yeah, absolutely wonderful guy.
I must try and dig those out.
Because he, he tells a great story about, as he traveled, he would bring issues of that, and he'd sell them to get, food money as he's touring to go see the shows and everything.
Yeah. I've still got some of the very, very early, like number 1 and number 2 Point Blank.
Oh, how fun!
Somewhere upstairs in a crate, I think.
Yeah, that's neat. So I always like to preface this, Jeff, with the amount of times you've seen Bruce perform live is not a good barometer of how big of a fan you are. I've had, in fact, this summer, I had 2 guests who are massive fans that seeing him on Broadway, this second run was the first chance they had to see him.
Wow.
So, but for the record, how many times have you seen him perform live?
Well, I knew you were going to ask this question. I haven't counted.
Okay, there's nothing wrong with that.
No, so I don't know. I think it'll be about 80.
Okay.
It'll be high 70s, low 80s, around that number.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and look through all the lists of all the tours and think, I was at that one.
Yeah.
I think I was at that one. It's around that number. I remember I saw 5 shows on the River tour. So so the River came out, and I was just thinking about this. I've still got I bought the River the day it came out, and I've still got the 2 pin badges that came with the initial releases. I've got them upstairs.
Oh, how fun!
One's got the picture of his face from the cover, and the other one's got Bruce in the blue writing on black.
Oh, nice.
So I've got those upstairs somewhere as well. And yeah, so and then they announced the tour, and in those days, of course, there was no buying your tickets on the internet. So we queued up all night, slept on the street to queue up all night to get tickets for the Manchester Apollo in my hometown. And that was my first show, was the Manchester Apollo show on the River Tour, and it was just, I was 8 rows from the front. It was amazing. The energy of that tour. I've still never seen anything like it. It's incredible.
Yeah.
So I think 5 shows on that tour, and I was 18, so I had no money. So I had two mates, 2 friends, Bob and Jeremy, and we went and saw him in London and Birmingham. But we'd just get, we'd buy the ticket, we'd get the bus down. We didn't have money for hotels or anything like that. We'd just sleep on the station. Just like you say, you just did what you could with how little money you had. In fact, I remember we stayed. I saw him at Wembley Arena, and we waited outside after the show, and we got a handshake and an autograph from Bruce. And then we just wandered the streets of London because we had nowhere to go, and we got to a place called Willesden, and there was a bus depot there, and we sort of sneaked into the bus depot. And I don't know if you've seen, the double-decker red London buses.
Sure.
So they used to have the ones with no back on them, no kind of back door. So we sneaked into the bus station and slept on the couches on the seats of the bus overnight.
How funny!
Until the driver came and woke us up the following day to take the bus out to work. So that was a lot of fun. Being 18 years old and following Bruce around the UK. Was great, and you also find, because this was before he made it massive really in the UK. I mean, he's still playing big shows, but it was still, you felt like a little bit of a member of a cult.
Yes, absolutely.
He was not a big superstar at that stage, but the people who were really into him were really into him. So we used to see the same people at every show, kind of thing. That was a lot of fun, that tour.
Yeah, that's great. So I feel guilty telling you this because I'm sure you have more important things to do with your time, but there is a wonderful website called myBossTime.com.
Yeah. I know My Boss Time.
Okay,
yes,
so
great.
you could, if you take the time to go, it will help you count your number of shows. So good.
Yeah.
I love that idea, right? That during your youth, you didn't have the funds, but you found a way to see as many shows as possible, versus later, as you get older, you may have more funds available, but it's harder to get the time because you have other responsibilities, whether it's a family or your job or, just all these other things you need to do. So there is that beauty of just, hey, let's go, Yeah.
Yeah, it was good. And I think for me, you asked what kind of spoke to me about Bruce when I first discovered him. It was kind of, being that age was particularly good as well, because it was kind of what I suppose first attracted me to Born to Run was the kind of romance, the escape, the road, all those kind of dreams, and it's a good time when you're young to get into that kind of that feeling in the music. And I suppose the other thing was, I read about Bruce, and I'm sure we've all read about Bruce saying like the music was his ticket out of Freehold. It was the escape, and that was the way we looked at music in the UK as well. If you were in a relatively dull suburban life like I grew up in, I guess, then there were 2 ways out. One was music, and the other was sport, football and sport. And they were the 2 kind of dreams for working class kids in the UK were sport and music. And kind of music was Bruce in particular was the thing that hit me that way.
Yeah. You mentioned going to university. What did you major in?
Well, I did politics, actually, not because I intended to get into politics, just because I was interested, just because I've always been into politics. And so I studied, got a degree in politics and economics, and then didn't really know what to do. So just kind of ended up in the music business,
Mhm.
running kind of festivals and concerts and that sort of thing. That developed because I was involved in running those kind of events at university,
Mhm.
running the musician society and that kind of thing. And so I got into the music business, and that became, I mean, I used to do sort of contract work doing, I don't know, a month on a festival or a week on a couple of shows kind of thing. And then to keep the money coming in, I took up DJing. I DJed at university and took up DJing again just to keep a steady income a little bit. And that kind of took off. So I did that. One time I was DJing 4 nights a week, 5 nights a week, different clubs and universities around the north of England. And so the politics didn't really get me into my degree didn't get me into a job. It's just I studied politics because I was interested in it, and I continued in political involvement.
Mhm.
As a kind of campaign volunteer and getting involved in my local party.
So everything I know about British politics is based on reading novels of Jeffrey Archer.
Oh,
So
really? Okay.
yes, so I am not that new. But I noticed you mentioned on your Twitter bio that you're a shadow minister. What does that mean?
So, I mean, it's just like being, I guess, in the US, you have the government and the opposition,
Right.
and so it's at the moment in the UK we have a Conservative government, and we have Labour is in opposition, and for each ministerial ministerial post, ministerial responsibility that the government have, we have the Labour Party, the opposition, have a shadow for that person. So I've got shadow responsibility. Relatively recently, just before Christmas, I was appointed shadow minister for sports, tourism, heritage, and music, which is great because it's some of my favorite things.
Yeah, I was going to say, but talk about, like, right down your your alley, right, just so to speak, right? Like, oh, okay, yeah, please twist my arm, let me help that.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of my colleagues said to me the other day, "You're like the roundest peg in the roundest hole in this parliament."
Yeah, no, that's true. That's a neat. That's interesting. So I want to go back to Bruce, but I have a political question for you, and if you end up don't want to answer this, I'll edit this out. But I am a I live in a very in the U.S. terms, very red district. It is my congressman was one of the few that Donald Trump recently endorsed for his reelection. Probably the only thing that my representative, I think, has done a good job on is he is a medical doctor, and he has seemed to be pushing out good information about vaccinations. However, he recently has made a turn where he thinks that healthcare is not being mandated to be vaccinated. We shouldn't fire them. And I'm like, what? How can you do that? Anyway, so I contact him fairly often about things, and my reply is always a polite, well, your opinion is wrong. Let me tell you what I believe is correct, and thank you for contacting me. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
So how do you balance, and that's why it's sort of specific between your personal beliefs and what perhaps your constituents believe, and that balance?
Carefully, I guess. I mean, I think I'm relatively lucky in that I live in what is quite a liberal metropolitan area.
Okay.
And I'm a pretty liberal kind of guy in political terms. So we don't have a lot of very strong conservatives in my patch, which I mean that's why they elected the Labour Party representative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
of course. But my area is probably smaller than a Congress. Well, it is smaller than a Congress district. So I'm guessing your guy has a number of different kind of constituencies to taken to ground. And so do I. I mean, I get people, particularly actually on the issue of COVID and vaccinations and mask mandates, writing in some very critical things about the way I voted. And all you can do is be honest with people and say, look, this is just what I think. And, you know, like you say, you're polite. I'm always polite to people. But I mean, that's what the job is. You have to make the decision. You make the kind of choice that you think is the right choice. And if people don't like it, they can vote you out.
And I do acknowledge that can be frustrating though when you feel like you know, your voice is not being heard. Though you're right. I mean, there is a reason why, as they've used it. I'm a little blue dot in this massive red field. So, but it is interesting at times. How have you been doing during this pandemic? It has been a horrible 2 years. Just the moment we think we're going to get better, things go to crap again. So how are you and your family been doing?
We've done all right, actually. I've managed to not get COVID, and most of my family have been okay.
So far, my wife, my adult son, and I haven't been. Now, the people, I'm back at work full time, in an office, and I am amazed at the amount of people around me, a lot of them home-based, have gotten, are testing positive. Now, luckily, this latest variant seems to be a lot milder. And partly because some of the people who are getting it had been vaccinated and boosted, but it is an ongoing, the gift that keeps on giving, in a cynical way.
Well, we've just come out of our regulations in the UK this week. Just a couple of days ago, we cancelled all the mask mandating and a lot of the kind of work at home and all those kind of regulations. So I think we're probably a little ahead of we got Omicron quite early, so I think we're a little ahead of the US and most of Europe and in coming out. And we just have to hope now that we don't have another variant that sets us back again. But like you said, who would have dreamed we would have what we've had over the last 2 years? It's been such a strange time for everybody.
It has been. One of the things I remember and kind of sheepishly is at the end of February of last year, one of my coworkers came to me and said, Jesse, I'm really worried about this coronavirus. And I'm like, oh, it's okay. News always makes a big deal about this. It's going to be fine. And then next thing you know, toward the end of March, we're all sitting at home and just putting this. So just a crazy time. I
remember seeing just before literally the week before it all happened in March. I'd been to see the Hold Steady. I love the Hold Steady, and they do a show, a weekend in London every March, and so that weekend we were all kind of jumping around, hugging each other at the shows, and then the following week everything closed down. It was just incredible how quickly it happened.
I had last year, I did a friendship month, and I did an episode. I did like 8 episodes of friends that had bonded through Bruce joined me on the episode, did a series of episodes. And one of them that made me laugh was a bunch of female fans had all gone to Light of Day. Like either in February or March, whenever that was, in 2020. And they were like, we were just enjoying ourselves and none of us had any idea of what was coming and that this would have been our last show. So getting back to Bruce a little bit, I always like to ask about favorite songs or albums. Before I get to that, talk to me about your feelings about Western Stars and Letter to You.
I love them both, and it's kind of almost. I think Western Stars was just so how can I put this? So kind of self-contained as a piece of work, and so lovely, and such great songs. It's just a little pretty perfect album. I think it's just I absolutely love it. And then Letter to You, I think is some of the best stuff he's done in a long time. I think I mean, I think I'll See You in My Dreams is up there with with the best songs he's ever written. I just think it's just so fantastic.
It really is, isn't it? I mean, just it's like I've told this story a couple of times, Jeff, on lately. My other musical obsession is the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson.
Oh, yeah.
The way you felt about Born to Run was when I got an 8-track of Endless Summer.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden heard this music and had never heard anything like it in my life, and did all the research and found everything. So Brian Wilson can do anything he wants. I am a huge fan of his music, and in fact, if someone will ask me what's your favorite album, I will probably say Pet Sounds, even ahead of a Bruce album.
Right.
But his latest CD is brilliant, but it is him playing the piano of different Beach Boy songs. He doesn't sing. It's an instrumental CD. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a lot of fun. But Letter to You, a whole new album of songs, pushing the boundaries, talking about that, an album of you just taking recycled music and putting out in a new way. They're both beautiful. I love both of them, but it just goes to show you that Bruce is continuing to push the musical boundaries, and his creativity in a lot of ways, it's somewhat in his 70s, is not slowing down.
No. And some of the songs, I mean, Burning Train, what a song that is. What a great rock and roll song that is.
It
and
is.
This guy's 70.
Well, I'm right there with you. In fact, I pictured in my mind as Burning Train kicking off a tour, right? Kicking off a set list.
Yeah.
And then I heard him do Ghost. I'm like, well, no, Ghost would be a pretty good way to start the show.
I think that's got to happen when he comes back. Whenever it happens, it looks like it'll be 2023 now, from what I hear.
Yeah, exactly.
But that first song has got to be Ghost, and I hear the sound of your guitar. You can just imagine the whole crowd singing that line.
It is amazing. So, talk to me about other songs or albums that mean something to you and why.
I mean, it's really all the early stuff that still is the albums that are like my favorite ones, really. Born to Run and Darkness, particularly, and Wild and Innocent. But I think it's like you say, he keeps pushing the boundaries. He keeps doing different things, and every now and again I'll listen to something that I've not listened to for a while and think, actually, this is great. I mean, I listened to Lucky Town a little while ago, and not having listened to that for a while, and think, actually, there's some fantastic songs on this album. So yeah, I mean, I love Wrecking Ball. I think that's a great album. I find it hard, to be honest, to choose, because in its own way, every album is done is different, and is has its great moments, so it's a great record.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement to say. He seems to know, like, I agree, Wrecking Ball was one of my favorite albums. It is my wife's favorite album. She is by far. Yeah, she, we had gone to the Rising tour, but neither one of us had really listened to the album much, and she did not care for it.
Right.
But when we got to hear Wrecking Ball, we both had listened to it a lot, and she was like, "Oh man, I really love this album." What do you
And again,
think?
that was something that, kind of hit a moment.
Yes.
It kind of captured that, the kind of recession era better than
Yes.
anybody else, I think, artistically did. And
Yeah.
some fantastic song. Jack of All Trades, I think, is just such a great song. So many great songs on that album. And then, he can put out, Nebraska, and
Yeah.
I love Nebraska. Just whatever mood you're in, there's an album there for you, I think.
Yeah, I think that is truly how to think of that is, and I also, you talked about, I wanted to mention that you said that the Beatles are a band that grows with you as you grow.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think you could say the same thing about Bruce, right? That I think Tunnel of Love means something different to a 24-year-old that has his heart broken versus
yeah.
someone like me, a 62-year-old that's been married for
Mm.
over 35 years.
Yeah,
The album speaks to me differently.
yeah, definitely. And you've hit a good example there, because I remember when Tunnel of Love came out, it didn't hit me in the same way as the previous albums had. And I guess it's because I was relatively young, maybe not mature enough to appreciate the depth of the songs on that album. But you
Yes.
get older, and it's one of my favorite albums now. I go back and listen to that and think, how did I not realize at the time how great this was? But I was still, I guess, swept up by the kind of the energy and the romance of I guess Born to Run and Born in the USA and The River and all those songs. And so Tunnel of Love didn't hit me in the same way, and then Human Touch and Lucky Town didn't hit me in the same way. So I went through, I suppose, a period in the sort of early 90s when I didn't listen to Bruce that much. And then I guess it was the reunion tour, kind of, it was like a reaffirmation, a rededication. He described it, didn't he, as a rededication of the band to the fans.
Yes.
And I kind of approached that reunion tour with a bit of trepidation. I only bought one ticket to one show. I thought, well, maybe this is going to be not so great, that we kind of rehashing the old magic won't be there. And I went, and it was just fantastic. And I went and bought a ticket for the following night's show, and it was like my personal rededication to Bruce and the E Street Band as well.
Yeah, I grew up in the South, and grew up as a Southern Baptist, and then later converted to Catholicism, partly because, majority because I was marrying a Catholic and decided, that this would work better for both of us. But, in the Baptist church and a lot of Protestant churches, you have revivals where you have a guest preacher come in and you spend 3 or 4 nights of, going to services with a lot of music and preaching. And, when Bruce talks about a rock and roll revival, I think that's what he was doing. I tell this story often on the podcast, but I think it's amazing. I had a guest that shared with me that, similar to you, he was sitting at the revival, he was sitting at the reunion shows, and he remembered being in the middle of the show in the pit going, this is it. This is the pinnacle of my fandom. It'll never get better than this. It's all downhill from here. But I'm happy. The band has gotten back together. We've gotten a great tour. And now then they're all going to scatter back on their ways.
Yeah.
And maybe every 3 or 4 years they'll do a greatest hits tour. But, this is a good ending. And he said, I think about that and I just want to go tell that kid, and he was an adult at the time, you have The Rising coming, you have Magic coming, you have Wrecking Ball coming, you have Bruce on Broadway, you have a river tour where he plays the river in full, there is just so much left. An autobiography, kid, he's just reached halfway in his career.
And the thing is as well, the shows just sometimes I just think get better. I mean, I still hark back to that first River tour to think that they're my favourite shows. But maybe next one after that is I saw him at the MetLife Stadium on the River tour, and it was so that was what 2016, wasn't it?
Right.
And it was the well at the time it was the longest show he'd done in the US, and he finished with Jersey Girl. I remember started with New York City Serenade, finished with Jersey Girl.
Yeah.
And I think that was maybe after those early River shows, that was my favorite Bruce show. After and that's 80 shows later and 40 years later.
So I think I've been to Jersey once, and I was on one of those shows. There was two, like one night, then the second, like 2 nights later, then he had to go back to Chicago, and then he came back for a third night. So I was there that second night.
Okay.
That was the one where the couple got engaged during Jersey Girl.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But I remember that was the first show, and I've done 16, including Broadway. That was the first show where I went, I've had enough. Like usually after the show, I'm like, man, I wish he could have done one more. I'm grateful, but I'm greedy. Right.
Yeah.
But that show with, it was almost 4 hours. It was, you got Jack of all trades with strings, and I was Jersey Girl with the fireworks.
Yeah.
I was like, this is perfect.
It was.
I am sated. And of course, a couple of days later, I was ready for more, but that was the first time I can remember going where, and I just think it is, the band has continued to, the cliche, right, like age like fine wine, but the reality is they've all gotten better, and that shorthand and friendship of theirs just makes a difference.
Yeah, and I think the sort of chemistry between them now, and they don't have the energy that they used to have in the old days, but there's the playing and the sort of chemistry between the band is as good as ever, I think. And we just have to hope it's we see it again next year, I think.
That's our hope. Yeah. The other thing I thought of that was interesting is I'm watching the No Nukes film, and I'm like, God, there's so few people on stage, compared to now, right? Because now you have, have Niels and Little Steven and Susie and Patty. So it is funny how much energy and sound came from a quote unquote small band.
Yeah, they were just the greatest rock and roll band.
They
ever.
really are. They really, really are. All right. So final thoughts before I get to the Mary question. Anything else that I should have asked you that I didn't?
So you were going to ask me what songs I'd like to hear live, actually.
Yes, that is exactly right. Yes, thank you.
So, and I'm kind of lucky that I've seen most of the things I want to see. So I've seen all the songs off the first several albums.
Yeah.
There are a couple of songs though that kind of legendary performances. I've never seen them do Quarter to Three. I'd love to see that.
Oh yeah, I would too.
They wouldn't be able to put the same, it wouldn't be a 1975 version of Quarter to Three, but I'm sure it could still be great. I've never seen them do The Fever. I'd like to see that.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing I'm most looking forward to actually is the stuff off the new album. Is Ghosts and Burning Train, See in My Dreams.
Yeah.
So I think they're if I was a Priest, actually, I'd like to see live as well. That'd be great.
That is one of my favorite songs on it. I would love them to throw in a couple of Western Stars songs.
Mm-hmm.
I think a couple fit really well. Like Little Steven did a version of Tucson Train, for his Summer of Soul, tour. So I'd love to see a couple of those. But absolutely, I would. That would be great.
Yeah, but we'll just take anything, won't we? I mean,
yes.
I haven't booked a holiday this year because I was waiting to see if he's going to do any shows in the US, and that's what I used to always do is book my holidays around Bruce tours. In fact, you're in Dallas, aren't you? I came to Dallas. What tour would it have been? It might have been the Working on a Dream tour. I flew to Houston, and then we saw me and my then partner. We saw him at Austin and Tulsa and one of the show, but I dropped into Dallas on the way and went to the Sixth Form Museum and saw the Texas Rangers play. So that was
Oh,
a fun trip.
that is a fun trip. I
Yeah,
always recommend people, if they're visiting, I say go to the Sixth Floor Museum. I know it sounds morbid, but it really is a great celebration of President Kennedy's life
yeah,
and just all the drama and of after the assassination. It
yeah.
is just a wonderful, well done museum.
It is. It's really interesting. I'd really recommend it. And we've seen the footage so many times over the years. It's kind of moving to be there.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So yeah, that was a good trip. So I'm hoping it may not be this summer. What I'm told is that they booked the band and Bruce had booked some shows, some stadiums for shows in the UK, but they've been pulled. They've been cancelled for this year. I don't know whether he's going to tour the US, but I'm hoping I might be able to plan another holiday in the US around some Bruce shows this year.
Yeah, I mentioned I do. I have talked to people who have talked to people who have talked to people, right? So the gossip game, but it sounds like that. And I was listening to the Boys and None But the Brave podcast that, understand that, almost every film and TV set has a COVID officer that kind of runs things. And he said that it is nothing to have the COVID officer come and say, okay, blank and blank have tested positive. They need to be all set for 5 days. And I know that's happening in my workplace. So, yeah. I mean, can you imagine, okay, Gary and Max tested positive. You guys are going to have to go on without a bass player and a drummer, And it's like, no.
Yeah.
Selfishly, I would love him to do a solo toward the end of the year, because then it would be like him and Kevin and a couple of techs. Seems like they could stay safe with, but the reality is we want them to be safe and to do what's right. So I think it'll be 2023 before we get them. And who knows, he may surprise us this year and give us another album. And then, so we'll see what happens. That is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can hope.
What's the furthest you've traveled for a show? Because Jersey's pretty far.
No, I've done a fair bit of traveling, actually. So I've been around quite a few places in Europe. I've seen him in New York a few times. I saw the Broadway show twice. I did that little trip out to Texas. But the furthest I've been, actually, I went to see him in Australia.
Oh, nice.
That was the last show I saw was in Brisbane. So I saw 2 shows in Australia in, what would that be, 2016, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Great
show. That would have been good shows to go to.
Yeah, they were nice, and I got to visit some friends there as well, so that was good. But yeah, that's most of my money goes on seeing Bruce and traveling to see Bruce.
Nothing wrong with that at all, Jeff. Nothing wrong with that. All right. So if you are listening to this podcast because you're a supporter of your local MP and you have not ever heard the podcast before, I end every episode with the Mary question. Jay Armstrong, who is a retired English teacher from the Philadelphia area, came up with this question. He would spend 2 days in his honors English class breaking apart Thunder Road, treating it as an epic poem, comparing it to Robert Frost and other poetry. They look at the imagery, they look at the themes that Bruce is exploring, and at the end of the 2 days, he asks this question: does Mary get in the car? So, Jeff, does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
Yeah, she gets in the car. She can't not get in the car, can she?
No.
So what does the professor think?
Well, he thinks she doesn't.
Oh, okay.
And about 60-40, 60% of my guests say yes, she gets in the car, and about 40% says she doesn't.
Oh.
About 40% think that he doesn't make enough case, or she's too afraid. So I always think that's interesting. Why do you think she gets in the car?
Well, it's that line. Does he make the case? You listen to that song.
Yeah,
Does he make the? I think he makes the case.
I think
If I was a woman, I'd get in the car with Bruce after that song.
I think so
My,
too.
my
I
partner's
agree.
behind me laughing.
What's that?
My partner's behind me laughing at that.
Yes, absolutely. Are they Springsteen fans?
Yeah, she's been converted.
Yes, very nice. Good.
Yeah.
Well, very good. Thank you so much for joining me, Jeff. This is a great. If someone wants to reach you, you're on Twitter, aren't you?
I am on Twitter. I'm at Jeff Smith, etc. So it's Jeff with a J, Jeff Smith, etc.
Okay.
Or you can just Google me. I'm MP, Jeff Smith MP. You can find me.
Yeah, it is fun. I had sent you an email confirming, and I got the I smiled because you talk about making sure your address, so I know if you're a constituent or not. Same thing for me when I reach out to both my senators and my congressmen. It's important to let them, I don't blame them. They're like, okay, are you in my district or are you not? I need to know that. So that
we actually have strict rules in the UK, so you're not allowed to take up cases for anybody who's not in your area.
Oh, fascinating.
Which is why we asked the question, but also, you do get kind of spammed by lots of people.
Yes, I can imagine. Yes. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Continued good health, continued success, and who knows, hopefully we can meet someday on the road and we can share a beverage and get to talk in person.
That would be great. Thanks for having me, Jesse. It's been fun.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Listeners, go get vaccinated, go get boosted.
Yeah.
Remember to be good to each other, because that's the only way we're going to get through this. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, listeners. Goodbye. I want and need your feedback. You can reach me multiple ways to tell me what you like or don't like about the show. You can reach out to give me guest suggestions, or maybe to join me on the podcast yourself. We're on Twitter at SetListingBruce or at Jesse Jackson DFW. I have an Instagram, SetListingBruce or Jesse Jackson DFW. Our Facebook page, facebook.com/SetListingBruce. Go to patreon.com/SetListingBruce to find out how you can support the show, and we have several tiers of support. Please go to your favorite podcast player and hit subscribe. And tell a friend about the podcast, because that is the way we're going to grow. If you're not tired of hearing me speak, you can hear me on Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast, where Charles Skaggs and I talk all things Doctor Who. The How Many podcast, where me and my friends Gary, Scott, Bob, and Jr. talk pop culture. And finally, my newest podcast, The Last Best Hope for Conversation, a Babylon 5 podcast, where Karen, Lou, and I are going through the TV show Babylon 5 one episode at a time. I am always looking for guests, so please reach out to me, setlustingbruce@gmail.com.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.